Under the Han Dynasty, much of what would become modern China was unified under a single emperor. After the short lived but powerful Qin Dynasty, the Han Dynasty is considered to be something of a golden age that included significant scientific advancement and economic prosperity, including events that would lead to the establishment of the Silk Road. But as history tends to show us, old eras end and new ones arise, and in the 2nd century AD, the dynasty faced a series of challenges that threatened to end the empire. Control of the southern portion of the empire was decided in a single legendary battle that is little remembered here in the West. The Battle of Red Cliffs deserves to be remembered.
Much of the history of this period is related to the 14th century novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, considered one of the 4 great classical Chinese novels. The romance is primarily based on the historical records of the Three Kingdoms, themselves written a relatively short time after the events they describe. The romance, written so long after, is a mixture of fictional and historical accounts, portrays the principal characters in a way that reflected a historical narrative on which characters were righteous or considered the proper heirs. The characters' portrayal as either heroes or villains is not necessarily reflective of the actual circumstances. The romance has heavily influenced popular conception of these figures, rightly or wrongly. The Han Dynasty came into power around 202 BC under Liu Bang, peasant-born minor law enforcement official who invaded the Qin heartland and forced the surrender of its ruler. The new dynasty lasted about 400 years, separated by a 16-year interregnum from 9 to 23 AD. Between the Qin and the Han, the dynasties established an empire that included most of the modern Chinese coast and significant lands inland, extending through much of modern North Korea and south into the northernmost regions of modern Vietnam. The dynasty also established a protectorate over a large western tract which extended well into Central Asia and became part of the basis for the Silk Road. The empire was run largely by the use of commanderies, territories controlled directly by the central government. By the year 184 AD, imperial authority was seriously eroding, thanks to a number of internal issues. Peasant revolts, the most important being the Yellow Turban Rebellion, threatened unity and would remain a threat for the next 4 decades. The emperor was convinced by advisors to decentralize power by granting further powers to provincial leaders, who were given the new title governor, given the authority to levy taxes and command forces within their borders. Ostensibly, the change was meant to allow local leaders to better put down rebellions, but it also provided the foundation for warlords to establish their own kingdoms. The emperor's death in 189 caused a further contraction of power as an imperial power struggle broke out. War and the weakness of the young emperor Xian led a number of warlords to rule over their territories like kings. Fighting among the governors continued well into the 190s as the empire disintegrated. In 196, a Chinese warlord named Cao Cao convinced Emperor Xian to move the imperial capital to Shu City, then under Cao's control. Though he had little power, Xian was still nominally the Han emperor of all of China. Cao had been an official within the imperial government since 175, and in the 190s had become governor of Yan province and secured his control of it. Though he remained officially beneath the emperor and was appointed minister of works and general-in-chief, in practice he held most of the empire's power. Still, he refused to usurp the throne or declare his own dynasty during his own life. In the records of the Three Kingdoms, he refused when his advisors suggested it, saying, "If heaven bestows such a fate upon me, let me be King Wen of Zhou." King Wen had centuries before rebelled against the Shang dynasty, but refused to take the throne for himself as a matter of honor. Instead, he let his son destroy the Shang dynasty and proclaim him King Wen posthumously. Cao seems to have believed it would be dishonorable to take the throne himself when he was pledged to the emperor. In the name of the Han dynasty, Cao began rebuilding the empire in the following years, slowly defeating other warlords in the northern part of the empire, including those who had declared their own dynasties. By 207, he'd secured much of northern China and turned his sights on the south. His 2 primary opponents would be Liu Bei, a general who had been involved in much fighting during this period, and Sun Chun. Liu Bei was a vassal of another warlord who was in control of Jing province to Cao's south and defended the province's frontier. The death of the warlord led to a succession crisis, and in September of 208, Cao invaded the province. Simultaneously, Sun Chun, who controlled a province to Jing's east, also attacked. In the chaos, Liu Bei was forced to retreat, taking with him as many as 100,000 unarmed civilians, so his force moved slowly. Cao Cao sent an elite cavalry force in pursuit to prevent Liu from finding time to build an army to oppose him. In October, Cao Cao's forces caught up with Liu Bei's in the Battle of Shangban. Liu Bei offered little resistance, instead offering a rear guard as he fled. Most of the civilians, his baggage, and even his daughters were captured by Cao Cao's forces. In the romance, the battle is romanticized and primarily focuses on the bravery of two of Liu's commanders. In the historical record, Zhang Fei takes a stand alone on a destroyed bridge, bellowing a challenge. He had ordered what few men he had at his command to tie tree branches to their horses and create dust by running back and forth in the trees behind the bridge, which gave the impression that troops were moving into position and that an ambush was being prepared, buying Liu Bei time to escape. In the romance, the bridge is not destroyed, and his bellow of challenge causes one of the enemy to drop dead out of shock. Meanwhile, another of Liu's commanders rescued Liu's wife and infant son, fleeing north and eventually bringing the pair safely back to Liu Bei. The sudden capture of Jing province by Cao Cao seems to have unnerved Sun Quan, who likely surmised that his own territory would follow in Cao Cao's reunification of the Han Empire. Liu Bei, fleeing in disarray, was seeking safety from an old friend when one of Sun's advisors caught up with him. The advisor would succeed in connecting Liu Bei and Sun Quan, which would lead to the formation of the Liu-Sun alliance against Cao Cao. Prior to capturing Jing province, Cao Cao did not have much of a navy. However, a large navy was brought under his command with the capture of the province. This was important, as control over the Yangtze was vital if Cao Cao wanted to continue south to reunite the empire. Cao Cao sent a letter to Sun, boasting that he commanded 800,000 men and implying that Sun would do best to surrender without a fight. One of Sun's advisors doubted the number and estimated instead that Cao had around 230,000 men, and that as many as 80,000 of them were recently impressed soldiers of Jing province, whose loyalty was thus uncertain. With Liu Bei's force, the alliance had around 50,000 men at their disposal. Long discussion ensued within Sun's court, but finally he is said to have chopped off the corner of his desk in an assembly and declared, "Anyone who still dares argue for surrender will be treated the same as this desk." The combined Liu-Sun force quickly moved to engage with Cao Cao's and followed the river to find the enemy army. Cao Cao's force was exhausted from the hurried march and the incredible collapse of the Jing province. Additionally, his armies were suffering from tropical southern illnesses that they were unfamiliar with in the more arid north. At least one of his advisors had advocated for the army to rest before seeking out another battle, but Cao Cao disregarded that advice, apparently counting on his greater numbers to win out. Whatever the actual size of the armies, the Liu-Sun force was heavily outnumbered, but they did have some advantages. Cao Cao's men were largely from the north, were not used to manning ships. Many of his ships were lashed together, possibly in an attempt to reduce his soldiers' seasickness. The opening move was made by one of Liu-Sun's commanders, who sent a note feigning surrender. The commander's capital ships, at least 10, but the sources are unclear, have been transformed into fire ships full of kindling, dry reeds, and oil. They broke off from the rest of the body and approached Cao Cao's fleet, but halfway across, the men on board set the ships alight and escaped on small boats. The flaming ships collided with Cao Cao's ships, killing many in the ensuing blaze. Capitalizing on the chaos, the Southern Alliance followed up with an assault, which threw Cao Cao's forces into confusion. Realizing he was losing badly, the Northern warlord ordered a retreat, burning more of his ships before he withdrew. The Allies gave chase, and Cao Cao's men were retreating across marshland so overrun with water that the sick and wounded soldiers had to try to fill the road in so mounted soldiers could even navigate it. The retreat was serious enough that many of the men were trampled in the chaos. Having held the province for so short a time, Cao Cao lacked any forward base that he could retreat to. He had established his navy by putting his infantry and cavalry on board ships, in a situation they were not trained for, against a much smaller but comparatively veteran navy. Once the soldiers had been defeated on the river, they were unable to regroup in great enough order to take advantage of their greater numbers. Cao Cao said that it was only because of the sickness that I burnt my ships and retreated, and brushed aside the southern commander's claims of brilliant strategy. The romance assigns more valor to Liu Bei and his commanders than to Sun Quan, owing to its 14th century cultural bias. It also adds several fantastical and fictional elements, including one of Liu's commanders pretending to use magic to call forth winds to drive the fire ships, as well as Cao Cao's capture and release during the following retreat. The Southern coalition might have been able to destroy the entire Northern army, however they ran into their own problems. Crossing the river devolved into chaos thanks to the limited number of ferries, and it took time for the Allies to establish a bridgehead, which allowed the Allied forces to bring their full power to bear. The delay allowed Cao Cao's forces to perform an effective rear guard, narrowly saving the Northern Army. Fighting would continue in the ensuing months between Cao Cao's generals and the Southern Coalition. By 209, Cao Cao's foothold in the south had been pushed 160 kilometers north, and Liu Bei had effectively carved for himself a territory for a kingdom. Sun Shun's forces had faced more serious casualties, and the death of his best commander in 210 weakened his position. Cao Cao never again commanded a navy large enough to oppose the southern territories, and the former empire was split along a north-south axis that would drive hostility for centuries. Liu Bei would go on to establish the state historians call Shu Han, while Sun Chun established the state called Sun Wen, and Cao Cao's son established Cao Wei. Shu, Wu, and Wei, as they were known, are the titular three kingdoms of the period. The term three kingdoms is itself a bit of a misnomer, since the leaders of each state styled themselves emperor and claimed rulership over the entire country. The Qin Dynasty eventually ruled over all three states, succeeding the Qiao Wei Dynasty. Initial historians generally considered the Wei the proper holder of the mandate of heaven. In the centuries which followed, that would shift as several historians instead turned to Liu Bei, enshrining him as the idealized Confucian ruler. This pro-Shu history is the one that was enshrined in the highly influential Romance.
The battle has been portrayed in popular video games such as Dynasty Warriors and Total War Three Kingdoms. In 2008, a movie about the battle was released in China, and it's well known enough in China that in 1998, a city that's near one of the possible locations where the battle was fought renamed itself Chibi City, just to connect itself with the battle.
The Three Kingdoms period is usually said to begin in 220 AD, when Emperor Xian abdicated in favor of Cao Cao's son, until 280, when the Qin Dynasty secured control over the entirety of China. Though relatively short, the Battle of Red Cliffs established some significant historical realities, such as the North-South rivalry, which would reoccur over the centuries.
The battle was also a pivotal moment in the creation of the Three Kingdoms, a legendary period in Chinese history, and part of an ongoing war that would eventually decrease the population in China by as much as 65%. It was a turning point that would influence history for centuries to come. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguideguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you have to do is subscribe.